Marbling. We're going to do a dark green marble now. It's very effective not just for decorative purposes but also as a background for paintings. The main product once again is the Faux Finish and Marbling Gel. So we start with a black background using the background colours, Matisse Black, or you could use gesso. Now what I'm doing here is I've just put out some marbling gel, and I'll just, through the middle of that, run some chromium green oxide, and then I'll add just a couple of other greens in there. I've got Hooker's green here, just a little bit, and some phthalo green, just to mix up the colours a little, to give a little bit more interest. So I'm going to now allow the green to mix on the sponge with the marbling gel. Before I use the sponge, I rinse the sponge out in water, soak it in water, and then squeeze it out completely. The sponge should be damp before you start. So my background here is nice and dry, and I'm going over now with the mixture, allowing it just to mix on the sponge. Now basically you want to turn the sponge around so you don't get a pattern, but don't turn it around on the actual project. Turn it around in the air and just keep moving it around. We're going to cover approximately 60%. Remember, you need to keep the coverage quite random. Whenever we see marble in its natural form, it's obviously it's a random makeup. So you need to keep that in mind. You want areas with quite a lot of paint and then not too much paint. Okay, now as that's drying, we need to add a little bit more marbling gel, just a little bit of white to the marbling gel, and we're going to drag the feather through the marbling gel and the white, just getting a tiny bit of white onto the feather, and we'll run the feather what I'd call backwards through the green, and the feather's going to do most of the work for us here. Now once again, I try not to be too negative when I'm describing how to put the veins in, but don't have the veins equally spaced and parallel to each other. They need to be uniformly random, if that's an expression. So the most important part now is using a very soft brush, normally a badger hair. This is hog and horsehair, but it's extremely soft and fine bristles. We very lightly start to blend some of these areas in. Not all of them, but just some. Now I'm barely touching the surface here. You can stipple as well, but once again barely touching the board. And also even some of the background areas we'll need to, with just the green, we just want to blend those ever so slightly. The other important feature with this, or the other important point, is to make sure you keep the brush dry. So keep all the paint off it, otherwise we're basically just painting. You will tend to work in the same direction as the veins. Make sure you don't get any obvious pulling with the softening brush, and if you do, just stipple it out a little bit. Now we can work on that for some time. Once this is dry, the green will sink right back into the black and it'll look very dull. Whenever we see marble, it's nearly always polished, so we need to put several coats of varnish on before we get the final effect. And you can see in the top corner where we haven't varnished, the colours aren't quite as lively as where we have varnished. We're going to do a Carrara marble, or actually a marble with a white background with black, but also add in some sienna or Australian sienna, which gives a real vibrancy to the marble. So starting with marbling gel, we've got a white background, the Matisse background white, or you could use gesso. And we take some flow white and allowing the white to mix in with the marbling gel on the sponge, we're going to cover somewhere between 50 to 60% of the background. Now we're putting the white over the white background. Obviously we're not going to see too much of it. Don't worry if you've got a few bubbles in there, because the next step of using a bit of marbling gel with just the tiniest amount of black in the marbling gel. So we're going to run the feather through the black. I'm just getting a little bit of black on there, and put our veins in black. Now this is done while the white that we've sponged on is still wet, and this will allow us to mix the black and the white, which will give us varying degrees of greys. So we've put our black in with the marbling gel over the top of the white. What we'll do now is blend or soften some of these areas into the white, and this is where we'll get some nice greys forming. We can stipple, once again making sure that we keep our brush nice and dry. And some of the areas you'll just want to leave with the way the feathers laid the paint down. Make sure as you do this that the white is still wet, and we might just put a couple of little dots of black in here and blend those in. Obviously studying some marble, probably as interesting as watching grass growing, but studying some marble will give you some ideas of what you're looking at. So we can leave the piece like this, more like Carrara marble, with the greys and the blacks, or we can take Australian sienna, mix it in with the marbling gel again, and it just adds to the colour and the interest and the depth. Once again, we allow the marbling gel and the Australian sienna, like we did with the white, to mix in with the marbling gel. And we can go over the top, allowing the Australian sienna to blend in places with the black, which once again just gives us a little bit more diversity and randomness to the piece. Varying the amount of marbling gel to the Australian sienna will obviously vary the strength and give a more random, a more realistic look to the piece. Once again, using our dry brush, we'll blend this, just soften it or feather it slightly so it's not as obvious that we used a sponge to get the finish. We'll just feather out the edges to blend in on this vein, and here we have an interesting piece of marble.